Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dear students, today we're going to learn about the deep cloning. Like we said, in the shallow cloning, the reference variables are not, the reference variables are just copied, but their objects are not created in a clone. They are common, right? So this is what we do here is we have a, for example, employee class, and I have made this clonable because I want this to be clonable. But the problem with this was that it has a string name, but an int ID. These guys will be copied as it is in the clone, but this department DEP, the reference variable will be copied, but the department object will not be copied in a shallow copy of a clone. So we have to do something else. So here we have in the name, ID, and department with a toString which returns me all those things. On only thing is when I say DEP, I will call the DEP.toString, because whenever I do what? I have an employee constructor, then I send it name, int ID, and I send it the DEP. That is basically, if you go to the main class here, I created the DEP of type department, which has its constructor which sends CSN101, and when I create the call the employee E1 and created the new employee, therein I send the name, I send the ID, and I am sending this DEP. So this is the reference variable of that object which is being sent to the constructor of the employee, that is here. Where is that? One second. This department, I have to go for the employee. Yeah, here. The constructor of the employee, that is here. So this DEP will be actually the copy of the reference variable of the department object. So this is pointing to the same department object which we created in the main. Okay, this DEP is pointing to that thing, and that reference variable we copied to our own DEP of the employee's DEP. So this is the reference variable which points to the same object which DEP of the department object points. So we have only one object, and the reference variable is copied here, right? So things are happening like this. Now if you want to make this clonable, you have to make it clonable, and you have to implement the clone method. We have the clone method somewhere. I don't know where is that. Here's the clone method, and I make it public. Only thing is I want to make it public, and I do nothing but call superdef clone, and we know clone not support exception has to be there and all that. But now when I try to clone it, and we have headers and getters method and toString method, we know as usual, and when I try to clone it here, employee E1 equal new employee, and I'm creating the department object, I'm creating employee object, and when I create another object E2 which is which has to be the clone of E1, right? So I am saying that make the clone of E1. So when it's a clone, you have to use clone not support exception, and I'm saying E1 dot clone. That means, hey buddy, make a clone of the E1. So convert it to the employee class and drop it in the E2. But the thing is that there, what the clone will do is it will copy the E1's all fields like ID and name and the reference variable DEP to the E2. That means E2 will have a DEP. E2 will have actually the E1's, it will have its own copy of name and ID of an employee. But where is the employee? Like this, the name and ID, it will have a separate copy. E1 will have its own copy of name and ID. E2 will have its own copy of name and ID. But DEP is the reference variable. E1 will have its own DEP and E2 will have its own DEP. But the DEP is not an object. This is a reference variable which will point to the same object. They will point to the same object which was created by here, just created by here, just created here, right, in this DEP, right, which is created here, which has the CSN101 in it. But I want deep copy, that I want that E2 will have its own separate object of DEP, like this object. We have E2 because E1 is having a reference which points to this. Now E2 should have its own object, which its DEP reference variable point to its own separate department class object, which has its own department name and ID. So if I change it in the E2, that should not change in the E1. But here in this scenario, if I don't do this, for example, and I am changing the E1.department or set department name, that E1's DEP, by that DEP I'm calling this department's set department name method, and I'm setting it to the MCA, for example, department name, which is MCA, but I'm printing E2. Okay, the E2 will have the name as Junaid, ID is this, department name will change in E2 also. I'm changing in E1, but it reflects in E2. So what I do is I say go ahead in the E2, but I have to change here. Firstly, I want to make the department class also as a clonable, so I'm making it clonable, and I have its get ID and set ID, and also the get department and set department. Okay, which actually you're setting the get department name and set department name, and which returns you the department name here. We have a string department name there. This is the variable basically. Just come up here, and this is the constructor which puts some things. And also I need here in the department class the clone method, which will actually be a toString method and a clone method, because I want to clone this. And in the employee class I also want to have a set department and get department methods. Okay, because get department will get the DEP. It basically returns that reference variable which I'm talking about. This reference variable is the object of that department class which we created in the first place in the main. And set department basically we pass reference variable to it, and that reference variable will be copied into the DEP of the employee class. Okay, okay. Now what we do is we go to this main, and we are here where we say e2.setDepartment. I am trying to set DEP of employee class. Now I have to pass some reference variable to this method, and which it assigns to its own DEP, employee's DEP, right? Now what I am passing here is the clone of the reference variable which is already there. Once again I will show it diagrammatically. Now what I was saying, if we have the even which is pointing to the object which has actually its ID, its name, and a DEP. Okay, with this DEP points to the department object which was created by the department class in the beginning, in the main, first statement of the main, and that has its own ID and name, department name. Okay, that has department name and ID. This DEP is pointing to this. Now if you create the E2 copy of the E1, clone of the E1, what it does is it creates its ID separate copy, it creates its name, and it creates its DEP also, which is separate copy, but this DEP is pointing to the same object which this DEP points. This is a reference variable which points to the object, and this reference variable, another DEP copy of E2 is a separate DEP, but that's again pointing to the same object, right? Okay, and here I have a method called set department and get department. If I say here get department, and I have here set DEP department, because get department will return me the reference variable. Say this has an address of 1000, which is actually this address. Okay, address of this object, department object, and it will also have 1000 because it's pointing to the same. Now if I say get department, it returns this 1000, which is actually the reference variable of this. If I set department, it puts something into the department. So if it say 2000, now it's pointing to the 2000s, for example. So what I do here is I make a statement that I am saying that E2, for E2 I say E2.set department. Okay, and I have to pass something, a reference variable which can go into this DEP. What I do here is I clone this class. I clone now this class. I have to make department of class as clonable and implement the clone there. I make this class as clonable. So when I make a clonable this class, it creates another copy of this class, exactly what here is, department ID and department name, and it has some reference value, say it is at a location 2000. Okay, so how I do that is I say, do me one thing. First, say what is this, if I'm going to clone E2, how I clone? I say the reference variable E1, which is pointing to this department, clone that. So I said usually here when I did this, I say E1 dot clone. So similarly I have to say here DEP dot clone. What the DEP is pointing to, clone that. Okay, clone that, clone DEP. So I could say here, because this DEP as well as this DEP pointing to the 100, right, 1000 location, say for example this location. So I say here, because I have to return here the reference variable, that is, in this case I want to return, I want to clone this department. So literally I have to clone this DEP, and then clone it, that comes 220, that has been assigned to this DEP. That's why I'm saying e2.set department. Now set department, if both methods are here and here also, set department is set into this DEP something, because I'm saying e2.set department. So e2, I'm saying e2 set department, it sets something to it, and I want to set 2000 to it, which is the address of the clone of this object. Okay, how I do that? I will say here that you do one thing. Firstly, you want to say this DEP. How you say this DEP? This is the get department will tell me what is there. So I say, for example, e2 or e1 dot get department. It will work both way, because e2 and e1 this time have the same department name. So I say for the e1 dot get department, whatever the e1 has, because I'm cloning the e1, so I will say e1 dot get department. So e1, whatever the e1 has, get department, they will return with the address of this object, that is 1000. Okay, that's actually DEP, right? This will return the DEP, what the DEP points to, and I clone that. And when I clone that, it will create me this thing, because I'm saying dep.clone. Now clone this, like I said, e1.clone, okay, which clones makes e2. Similarly, I said dep.clone. Now what is dep? That's e1.getDepartment. Okay, so, and I have to typecast to the department class because it's a department object. Okay, and now this thing will give me the address, basically address of the next object, and that I will put it here as an argument to the set department of e2. Now e2.set department means it puts something into the department. What it puts, it, because this one gets the clone of this object that has the address of 2000, so it returns 2000. Now it returns 2000. So when it's 2000, it's no more pointing to this, it is pointing to the separate object this. Okay, so now we are getting two separate objects of department. So now, before cell copying, the department DEP and this DEP was pointing to the same object. Now we cloned this object as well, and now copied that back to the DEP. Now we got the two separate deep copied objects. Now E1 is separate, having separate ID, separate name, DEP pointing to the separate object. Okay, and E2 has got a separate ID, separate name, and DEP is pointing to the separate object here. So that's what is deep copying doing here. If I go back to my program here, what I'm saying here is, as you can see now, I say e1.getDepartment. What is the get department? Returns the address of the object, that object, and I clone that. Okay, I clone that and typecast to department and pass it to the set department of e2. Now e2 is pointing to the new cloned department object. Okay, now if I say, if I don't have this thing, e1.this thing, if I don't clone the object, I cloned e1 of the e2, but the reference object will be same for both. Is it? So if I copy the, if I change the department name of e1, but e2 will have the same department name. I'm printing e2. The e2 will also reflect the MCA. But now if I do this, now e2, if I'm changing the e1's department object I'm changing, but e2 has separate department object to reflect the old one. It will not reflect the MCA, reflect the old one, because it proved that it's a separate copy now. So this is what's called as a deep copy. Okay, that's all for this thing. You can have a look at the program. We have a test, and then got a department which we made clonable. We got ID, get ID, set ID, and then we got its get department name and set department name, because we have variable set string department name. Now we got a constructor, and we have the toString method as well. We have clone method also, because now we have to clone the department class as well. And we got an employee, that is the again clonable into a couple of things of its own, and one reference variable DEP of the department, and toString method. And then we got the here, because when I want to print this DEP, actually I want to print DEP.toString, because DEP knows the address of the object, and it prints that object's toString method to give what lies inside of that object, department object, for example here. And we'll name, ID, and department as an employee is a constructor, and get department, set department, get name, set name, get ID, set ID, clone, and a clone method which does all things of its own. So this is what's called as a deep clone. That's all today. Until next time, Masalam.